So I figured out the reason I cannot because I'm a guest.
Okay, maybe.
Guests will not have the controls for sharing anything. Only the
Okay,
host has those.
okay, might be. So let's begin with the session now.
Sure.
So happy morning, everyone. I Neha Sharma, Assistant Professor in the Department of Management Studies. Once again, welcome you all for yet another powerful session under Unplugged Inspirational Talk series. The series of events is hosted by Institute of Information Technology and Management. The institute is affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University, New Delhi. Institute has been accredited grade A by National Assessment and Accreditation Council NAC. It is rated as category A plus by SFRC and A by GAF Government of NCT of Delhi. Institute takes immense pride and honor to welcome our thought leader of the session, Dr. Kiriti Mishra. Let me take the honor to give a brief introduction of Kirti. Kirti is an assistant professor at Indian Institute of Management, IIM, Udaipur, in organizational behavior and human resource management area. She is an early career researcher who has previously held appointments at Monash University, Swinburne University, and University of Queensland. Her area of research predominantly focuses on corporate sustainability, organizational responses to climate change, and strategizing for grand challenges. Kirti's research work has been presented at multiple European Group of Organizational Studies and Academy of Management conferences and published in Australian Journal of Environment Management and South Asian Journal of Human Resource Management, among others. We welcome you, Dr. Mishra, for being a part of this Unplugged Inspirational Talk series. Now, for my audience, let me tell you, students, the key objective of education is to stimulate the thinking process. Now, the session will lay emphasis on realizing the role of critical thinking in all life decisions and choices, understanding the importance of questioning in thinking critically, and importance of creativity as a fundamental skill that not only impacts on all the areas of learning, but also impacts on students' long-term outcomes to become resourceful and resilient adults. Now, students, if you have any question, as I have already stated, you are requested to reach me out on nehasharma@iitmipu.ac.in either before or during the session. Your questions, if found relevant, will be definitely put to the speaker towards the end of the session. Now, let's begin. I once again, on behalf of IITM, welcome you all for the fifth session of Unplugged Inspirational Talk series by Dr. Kiriti Mishra, Assistant Professor, IIM Udaipur, on creativity and critical thinking skills. Over to you, Kirti.
Thank you so much. That was a very generous introduction. I'm very happy to be here. And before I start my talk, I want to give you a bit of a, I don't know if it's a story, but it's a personal experience why these two topics of critical thinking and creative thinking are very close to my heart. Way back when, we have to go back into history. Um, when I decided to pursue my postgraduate education in Australia, um, this word, critical thinking, was a part of all the course outlines that I was looking at. Um, when we were, and I'm sure there's this master's, postgraduate, as well as undergraduate students here. When we think about what should a graduate have, in terms of skills, knowledge, what should be some graduate attributes, I found that every course outline had this as a priority that every graduate should have critical thinking and creativity skills. And I had not seen that before. When I did my undergraduate study in India, I had not seen that. I had not seen that sort of, that grand emphasis that it was out in your face that you have to be a critical. And that's how my journey in understanding what does it mean to be a critical and creative thinker How can I become a creative and critical thinker? And why is it relevant? And why does it continue to be relevant? That journey started for me. I'm still on that journey. I wouldn't say that I'm a great critical thinker, or I have reached the echelons of creative thinking. I wouldn't say that, but it's a journey. And I will be, and that's what the point of today's talk is, that I want to shed some light on why these two skills are very important. Why are we talking about them? The relevance of these two skills. Why is it of utmost importance that every graduate should demonstrate these skills? The fact that these skills means we can acquire them. So therefore, we need to understand that how as individuals we can work on building these skills in us. So get it out of your head. Each one of us, we have the critical creative thinking uh, gene in us, or a muscle in us, and each one of us can work. So get this out of your head. We're all very creative. We're all very critical. It's just that we haven't paid attention, and we haven't proactively worked on these particular skills. So with that sort of a preface, I I
Kirti, your voice is not clearly audible.
could you please move? Could you
Yes,
please
yes.
start with the slides? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, sure. Are the slides visible?
Thank you. If we could just move to the second slide.
Sure.
Right. So, as I was saying, why is it that we're talking about critical and creative thinking skills? Now, this is the most recent report from the World Economic Forum, and I'm sure most of you have heard about the fantastic work that WEF does. Now, if you pay attention, so these are the top 10 skills which we need in our people, in our job force over the next 5 years. And you'll be able to see number 4 and number 5. It's critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality, and initiative. And these two are part of the broader skill, which we say, problem solving. So these skills have been recognized as critical skills that we need in our people, we need in our society if we have to move forward. One of the reasons is that right now we are facing grand challenges. We're facing a lot of problems, problems of sustainability, problems of climate change. I don't have to talk a lot about COVID. We all are already going through that. Workplaces are changing. We're dealing with new technologies. So, what we need now is problem solvers. And if we have to become effective problem solvers, these are the two skills that we need: critical thinking and creativity. Next slide, please.
Are the slides visible?
The slides are visible. Yeah, could you please move to the next slide?
Yes. Okay.
I think it would be easier if we just went for the presentation mode. If you turned on the presentation mode, then it's easy to navigate to the slides.
I've already turned it on. Just a minute. Yeah, now it is visible.
It is visible, but at least to me, it is still visible in the normal format. The presentation format is not turned on.
Okay, just a minute. Now it is visible in the presentation mode?
Not really, but that's all right. We can just we can manage with this.
Okay.
Not a big problem. Yeah. So if we could move to the previous slide, please.
Yeah,
Slide
sure.
3. Thank you.
Is it visible? Because now this is slide 3.
I can only I can see slide 4 and not 3. Is that all right if I actually don't use the slides? It's just making things more confusing.
Yeah, it would be fine. It would be really fine. That's okay.
Yeah, let's not interrupt the narrative, and we're very sorry. There is some technical glitch because of which the slide share option is not working. So we don't need slides. You can all see my face, and I'm happy to talk without the slides. So as I said, right, these two skills utmost important when we are thinking of the next 5 years. What is it that what is it that critical thinkers bring to the table? Like I said, the fundamental reason why we need more critical people is because problem solving. We need innovative solutions to the problems. We need to understand that every solution we have also creates a problem. So we need this, we need a continuous inflow of people who are solving problems and who are coming up with new ways of looking at existing problems. We also need people who can apply research skills. I'll talk a bit more about this when we are looking at what is information and what is reliable information. And then problem solving also involves communicating the solution. Communicating the solution in a way that it can be understood by people who are going to implement it, so that it can be understood by people who are going to be the beneficiaries, who are going to use those solutions. So communication is also a aspect of critical thinking. Sometimes we get confused. We think, thinking means it's just in my head. Well, if it's just in your head, it's of no use. So we need to also work on our communication, being effective, being able to communicate in a very perceptive and effective manner if we want to become critical thinkers. And do remember that both these skills, I use this analogy a lot. Think of these two skills as muscles in your body. So maybe, this muscle and this muscle. This means that we have to continuously exercise them. You have the muscle, but we have to work on them. So critical thinking is not going to be something like, today I am going to bed and next morning I wake up and I'm going to be a critical thinker. It doesn't work like that. We have to constantly practice some, so we have to practice some exercises. We have to use some tools in order to become effective critical thinkers. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to share some of the tools, some of the techniques that I personally have used, and I encourage my own students to also follow those practices. So I'm going to share some of those practices with you. Now, before we actually, understand how we can become critical thinkers, I think it's also critical to understand what really is critical thinking. Very simply put, it's the idea to be able to reason, to answer the why and how. Why is something happening? So, for example, before we started the talk today, we figured out that I was not able to share my slides on the Teams app, and immediately my mind was working. So, why is this happening? And then I did some digging, and I found that it's because as a guest on Microsoft Teams, I will not have the privilege to share any content. It is only the host of the meeting who can share content. So it's the ability to reason, it's the ability to look at what is happening and understand why is this happening, how is this happening. It's the ability to think clearly using information. It's the ability to look at different kinds of information and being able to connect and make sense of that information. So what is the relationship between A and B? Is there a direct relationship? Is A being, is A an antecedent of B, or is something else happening between A and B? Do we need to put some extra information there? How are ideas connected? What leads to what? And one of the important things that as critical thinkers we need to do is we need to start questioning. We need to, we just cannot. Critical thinkers are not going to look at a fact or look at an idea and just take it at its face value. We question it. So for example, today's talk series, when I tell you, hey, everybody, critical thinking is very important and you need to listen to this talk carefully, you need to make notes. You should answer, you should question me, you should ask me, Kiriti, why are you saying critical thinking is important? Why do I need to pay attention to this? Why do I need to develop that critical thinking muscle in myself? So this questioning, right? Don't take things at their face value. What is it that's, what is the what is happening behind the scenes? What are the assumptions behind ideas? We question them. And rather than making decisions based on, instinct or based on emotion, for a critical thinker, it's all about information, relevant information, and systematically analyzing that information before you come to any final solution or before you come to any recommendation. So we collect facts, we see what are the linkages in these, how are these facts connected, how are these ideas connected, and then we systematically analyze it. We use tools, I'm pretty sure that you are under, in your degree programs, you're learning skills, you're learning tools about data analysis, quantitative data analysis, experimental methods, qualitative data analysis. So we systematically apply these tools to the information we have gathered and then come up with the solutions. So a lot of critical analysis or, critical thinking is about collecting information, gathering information, and trying to collect information from as many different sources as possible. Because if we only rely on one source, then it could be a biased data set. It could be a source which is, telling us only one side of the picture. So here I would like to, you probably might have heard about this story, but I love this story. It's about, a few blind men, and there was an elephant in front of them. And they couldn't see the elephant, and, the blind man is touching different parts of the elephant. So when he touches the trunk, he thinks that it's one thing. When he touches the tail of the elephant, he makes a different conclusion, comes to a different conclusion. So that's the thing, right? When we only limit ourselves to one source of data, we're only getting one part of the puzzle. If we want to become effective problem solvers, we need to understand what can be happening from multiple perspectives. So collect as much information from different sources as possible. If we only focus on one source, then we are not getting the full picture. So it's really important to understand the entity, the entative perspective of the problem that we have, a holistic perspective of the problem or the scenario that we have. I teach MBA students, so do forgive me for relying a lot on management problems. But many a times when you're looking at customer dissatisfaction, it might not have anything to do with the product. It probably has something to do with how your employees are engaging in the workplace. And so it's an HR problem, not really a marketing problem or not really a product design problem. So we need to understand the different perspectives of a problem or of a scenario that we are facing. Now, there are a couple of confusions or there are a couple of myths that I would like to, as we move on, I think it's important that we get these myths out of the way as soon as possible. Please remember that critical thinking is not about accumulating information. Google already does that for us, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? There's so much information already. You can ask, I see 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds asking Alexa, asking Siri, and asking Google. There's a lot of information. Critical thinking doesn't mean that you have to all become human encyclopedias. What critical thinking is, what is it that you're doing with that information? What kind of conclusions are you drawing from that information? Right? If you see that customers are lining up at the coffee shop, what does that information mean? Does it mean that the service is not fast enough? Or does it mean that my coffee is actually so good that there is a rise in traffic? So just that information is nothing, but how you interpret that using, logic, using reasoning, that is what critical thinking is all about. Critical thinking doesn't mean, questioning doesn't mean that we have to argue with people. And it definitely doesn't mean that we have to be critical of individuals. We are never critical of individuals. We are always critical of ideas. We question ideas. We never question individuals. So we have to make it very objective. And the idea of critical thinking when we are questioning is actually to make it better, to come up with a solution which is better and more effective. So the idea is not to bring down people, critique people, argue with people, or fight people. The idea is to improve the solution that we are questioning. And finally, there's a lot of people think that, okay, if I have to be a critical thinker, then I cannot be creative. Because you're saying that critical thinking means I have to be very rational in my thinking. It's a very linear way of thinking. Well, that's actually not true. Critical thinking means that you should be thinking outside the box. When you're questioning people, when you're questioning the assumptions of a fact, you're automatically moving away from the status quo. You're automatically thinking outside of the box. So critical thinking and creativity go hand in hand. In fact, I personally believe that critical thinking is going to lead to creativity. That's why I'm talking about critical thinking before and creativity later. Now, as I said, or sort of, promised you that I want to talk to you about how we become critical thinkers or how can we improve critical thinking. So the first method or the first practice that I think we can understand or we can that can help us become more critical in our way of thinking, in our way of approaching problems, in our way of approaching different scenarios, personal or professional, is the problem identification. What is going on, right? Many of you, I think, especially people who are doing business degrees, you might have been exposed to case analysis or problem analysis, where you're given a scenario, you're given a case study, and you're asked analyze it, identify the problem. So problem identification is very critical. What is the situation you're looking at? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And it helps, so I use what is called a funneling technique. You start with a very broad problem and then you start narrowing it down and come to the issue that is of utmost importance to you. Maybe it's a management problem, maybe it's a marketing problem, maybe it's an HR problem. So understanding what is going on. And how do we do this? We first start, we work on collecting data. We look at, okay, what is happening here? Who are the people involved? Who is making the decisions here? What kind of decisions are being made? And then what we do is we sort of do a gap analysis. We understand what is happening, and we also understand what should be happening. So here's a real picture and here's the ideal picture, right? We're trying to make a change. We're trying to solve a problem. So if my, again, I'm very sorry to be using management problems and examples for you, but let's say I'm working in a company and I'm struggling with employee attrition. This is very common in tech sector. Employee attrition rates are going up. They're higher than the industry average. Let's say that my attrition rate currently is at a 20%. That's problematic. How do I know? I have looked at the data and I see that in the past year, a lot of employees have been leaving the organization. A lot of management trainees have left the organization. So from that data, I know that my attrition rate is very high. It's 20%. So now we know this is what is happening. This is the reality. But what do we want? So maybe let's say that I want to reduce that attrition rate and I want to bring it down from 20% to 5% in the next year. So now you see the gap. I'm sitting at attrition rate of 20 and I want to come back to 5%. Now we start looking at how do I get to that? How do I get to the ideal scenario of 5%? What are the factors which will drive that? What are the factors which might inhibit it? And to just give you another tool that I found very useful is this idea of force field analysis. We start understanding what are the factors which will drive that change that I want to achieve. What factors will help me get to 5%? Maybe I need to have more engagement, maybe support from the management. Maybe I need to look at my salaries. Maybe we are underpaying our people. But what are the restraining forces? These are COVID times. Financially, we might not be able to give any incentive to our workforce. So we look at both sets, right? We look at the pros and cons or the cost benefit analysis. And then we come up with the final decision. We analyze each one of these elements before we say this is how we are going to work on the problem of attrition rate. So problem identification, key things to remember. We need to have a narrow problem. We need to define it narrowly, and we need to consider many, different sources, many different perspectives before we finally define our problem. Remember, sometimes, so the think about peeling an onion. We have to remove those layers, because if you define the problem, if you identify the problem wrong, then the solution will automatically not work. So when we say critical thinking, it's about collecting information and identifying what is the problem. So you're peeling the layers of the onion. You're asking a lot of questions, you're collecting a lot of data, and then making a logical decision over there. Now, with identification of the problem, simultaneously, we have to invest in a lot of research. This, we are living in very interesting times. There is facts, there is alternative facts if you follow the American political system, and then there is fiction. And we have to understand that these three things are very, very different. There's a lot of data there, but what is reliable data? How we get there is through research. So as a critical thinker, you spend a lot of time doing research. So for example, when I was preparing for the talk today, and my key argument here is that, critical thinking skills are essential. But where is the data to support it? And this is why I was looking at sources which have said reliable sources. And World Economic Forum is a reliable source. People know about it. It is peer reviewed. People have looked at it. And also, I looked at the time relevance here. I cannot say that, critical thinking skills were important in the year, in the previous century. Therefore, I looked at the most recent report from the World Economic Forum, because what was happening 50 years back doesn't make sense to us. If you're working in marketing and you want to, look at the demographic data of India, you're not going to look at you're not going to look at 1947 census. That doesn't help you. You're going to look at the most recent reports that we have about demographics in India. So collecting data, gathering information. These days, while we have a lot of information, reliability has become very important, right? So WhatsApp is not a reliable source. When I get my students, MBA students, as well as research scholars, whenever they are doing any kind of, whenever they're making an argument, I always ask them, where is the evidence for this? Where is the source for this information? So as a critical thinker, you have to constantly be asking, where is this information coming from? What was the motivation of that individual or of that, of that company in sharing this information? Because we have to check for the reliability of that information. So constantly researching, constantly looking at, okay, what is the source of information? Who has said that? Right? Just because somebody has shared this on WhatsApp or somebody has tweeted about this doesn't make it a fact. We have to separate facts and alternative facts and fiction, and therefore it is important that we do a lot of research so that we understand that an opinion and a fact are two different things, right? So we cannot make our decision because, based on an opinion. We do due diligence research to identify what is a fact, and that's how we make our decisions. The third thing that I want to sort of talk about is the role of biases. We're talking about individuals, we're talking about people making decisions, so biases will definitely creep in. It is really important that we are aware of our own biases, because as a critical thinker, what you're doing is you're making a lot of judgments. You're looking at options, you're looking at option A, option B, option C. So you're choosing, you're making a judgment, you're evaluating whether option A is better, option B is better, option C is better. And whenever we are evaluating, whenever we are making judgments, biases will creep in. Biases also impact the information which is out there, right? What is the bias with which this company is, producing their annual report? They want to show that they are doing really well in financial terms. They're writing this for their shareholders. So there's a bias there. So we need to constantly be asking ourselves a question. What is my bias in making this particular judgment? Am I saying that Nike is a good company because I own a pair, I own 10 pairs of Nike shoes? Or do I really think that Nike is a very sustainable company and here's the data to support it? Am I saying that Zara is a very sustainable company because I buy Zara clothes and I like their fashion? Or because they have been audited by a third party and they have been labeled as a sustainable company by this independent auditor? So we have to continuously identify those biases and understand where these biases are going to come from. So remember that each one of us has biases. But the trick here is that we are aware of these biases and we try to address those biases. It's a simple thing, right? Like when a friend shares some information with us, we are more likely to believe that it's truth. But as a critical thinker, we will not automatically make that conclusion. We will check where that information is coming from. I'm not just going to believe that piece of information because my friend told me. I'm going to believe that information because there is more evidence, more objective data which supports that claim. So it's really important that we are aware of those biases. Now, as I said before, we live in the information age, right? All of you, I'm sure, have smartphones. You probably have the dual SIM smartphones as well. Information is everywhere. We can ask Alexa, we can ask Siri, we can ask Google for anything under the sun. So there's a lot of information there. Then how is critical thinking different here, or how do we apply critical thinking here? The difference is what you do with that information. So what will separate a critical thinker is how we make sense of that information, right? That if people are drinking more coffee, what does that mean? I'm going to ask myself, does that mean, it could mean that the coffee is good. It could also mean that there is no other, maybe there's tea is not available. It could also mean that coffee is cheaper than tea at that point in time. So asking questions and understanding, what does this information mean? So collecting data, having all of that information is of no use for a critical thinker. It is what you do with that information. What kind of extra information do you ask for? So I'll give you a funny example here. Looking at people's weight, right? So if somebody told you that, so you had not seen that person and somebody told you that, I weigh about 100 kilograms. I'm sure most of us will be like, oh my God, this person is probably overweight. Maybe they're not physically fit and they need to do something to reduce their weight. Now, what a critical thinker will do is immediately ask this individual, what is your height? What is your body composition? Because just looking at the weight, that information, it means nothing. I need to get some information to support that, some extra information. And then I need to know what to do with that information, because you could be a very tall person. You could have very different metabolic rates, which would mean that you're not really unhealthy. So just looking at that one data point that somebody is 100 kilos, if we make that inference that, okay, you must be unhealthy or you must be overweight, you must be obese, will be wrong. So we need to understand, we need to even ask more questions. And in navigation studies, there is this concept of triangulation. That, when you are traveling, when people used to, in the earlier times, when the people like, people used to go on navigation tours, and they used to mostly travel by ships. For navigation, they used to say, if you get 3 points, if you get 3 data points, you triangulate those 3 data points, and that will take you as close as possible to the destination that you are trying to get. So try to get 3 data points. We can apply the same principle in critical thinking, that gather information before you jump to conclusions. Try to gather information from different perspectives. So for example, in organizations, one of the things that we do is, whenever we are looking at a management problem, we try to gather information from across the organization. So we'll get information from the CEO, we'll get information from the people who are working on the floor, we'll get information from the customer service guys, we'll get information from marketing, HR, so that we can get a better picture and we can make better inferences. So remember, data, information on its own is not of use. For a critical thinker, what is it that you do with that information? What kind of questions do you ask from that information? How do you connect that information? And like I said, right now there is an emphasis. We are working, there's so many great tools for data analysis, for data connections, and we use all of that to make sense of that data. Finding the relevance of the information has become increasingly important. Unfortunately, we live in times of fake news. So it's really important that you identify whether information is relevant or not. If you have defined your problem properly, if you have defined your problem in a very narrow manner, and if you have spent a lot of time in defining your problem, then automatically it will narrow down the kind of information that we use. So it's always better to spend some time in identifying the problem, in identifying the scenario, and then you start looking for relevant information. So it creates a bit of a discipline. And finally, one of the most critical elements that we need to understand is curiosity. We cannot become critical thinkers if we are not curious, if we are not asking those why questions. Think of a time, maybe if you cannot think of the time when you were little, if you have siblings, if you have really young, if you spend some time with the really young people, you will find when they're kids have this tendency to always ask why, right? If you tell them you have to eat green vegetables, why do I have to eat green vegetables? If you tell them breakfast is important, why is breakfast important? So all of this, so we sometimes, what happens is, as a kid, we are constantly asking questions, but as we grow, we somehow forget that. We just start, we go to our classrooms, our teacher has said something in school and we just take it for granted, we learn it, we reproduce it in the exam, and that's it. We go to a college, again, we don't ask questions. And I can say that, I've experienced this from both the sides now. As a student, I always used to hate when our teachers would be like, please ask questions. Teachers will tell you there are no stupid questions. Every question is good. Please ask questions. And I used to hate that, right? So I understand where many of you might be coming from. But now that I'm on the other side, right? Now that I'm on the other side as a teacher, I finally learned the importance of asking questions. That we need to constantly ask why. We have to be curious about things, right? So, for example, just now, when I was not able to share my PowerPoint slides, I could have let it go, to be very honest, because we're using Microsoft Teams and I don't really use Microsoft Teams as a tool. So I could have let it go. But I was like, no, it was, at the back of my mind, it was irritating me. Why can't I share my slides? What is wrong? So it was immediately, I sent a message to a few of my friends who use Microsoft Teams. And I was like, could you tell me what is happening? What is wrong? Why is it that I can't do this? Why can't I use a feature? Don't let that curiosity go away. If we are not curious, then we cannot become critical, because then we are not questioning. And always ask open-ended questions, right? We tend to ask yes or no questions. Those are very close-ended. There's no scope for learning if you're asking yes or no questions. It's only when you ask open-ended questions, then you can ask follow-up questions. That's how learning will be enhanced. That's when you will understand, okay, there are different ways of seeing the same problem. So ask as much open-ended questions as possible and try not to, ask yes or no, very close-ended questions. So continue to be curious. We need to be very, very curious all the time. Now that we've talked a lot about critical thinking, wanted to talk to you about the creative side of things. As I said, I personally believe that if you're a critical thinker, then you will automatically become more creative. And I'll tell you why. Because if you're a critical thinker, you don't take anything for granted. You question it. You try to understand that why is this being said? Or why is this happening? And the moment you're questioning assumptions, you start thinking about new ideas. You start thinking about outside of the box. So critical thinking is, I think, it fuels creativity in us. Why are we talking more and more about creativity these days? Because we are facing problems, we are facing challenges which are very new. So we cannot continue to use these solutions or use things that have worked for us in the past. And COVID is a great example of that. Last year, when suddenly there was the lockdown, everything was shut down. What will we do now? And we saw that some great ideas have flourished in that time period. We've all transitioned to work from home. I remember we were thinking, how am I going to teach? How will students participate in class? How will they ask questions? How will I know if the students have understood something or not? And then we started using different kinds of technologies. So COVID has been, there has been a spur in a lot of creative ideas, creative things. To give you an example that I found was very interesting, Airbnb. And of course, there's COVID, there's lockdowns, travel is not happening. So one might have thought, what is Airbnb going to do now? And I was just, I was curious. Like I said, it's very important that we continue to be curious. I was curious. What will a company like Airbnb do now? I mean, even if, we all got vaccinated, I think there's always going to be a little bit of apprehension that we'll take some time before we start traveling and before we start using the facilities offered by Airbnb. So I went to their website and I was checking their website as to just listen, to see what are they doing in COVID times. And they've introduced this concept of experiences, wherein you can be sitting in your home, right? So one of the experiences that I went for, I can't travel to France anymore, but I'm interested in learning about how to make wine. And so they had this experience of wine making. So through Zoom, this person in a small town in France is teaching you how to make wine, how to taste wine, and so many of these examples, so many of these different things which companies have come up with is because of creative people. It's because of people who have said, okay, how can we, what else can we do? What else can we do? What does this mean? What do we want to do? How can we think outside the box? So this is why we are talking a lot about creativity, that we have got to think outside of the box. These solutions that we have used in the past are not going to work in the present or in the future. So we need to challenge our older learnings, our older views, our older assumptions, and we need to come up with new ideas. So that's where creativity comes from. And a lot of people say that, creativity is basically solving a problem. So you analyze the problem, you break a problem into multiple parts. You analyze, you look for those connections. So this is where critical thinking comes in. You're collecting information, you're questioning the basis, the assumptions of different kinds of information. You're solving, you identify what is the critical problem. You prioritize the different sub problems in the larger problem. You come up with a solution. You structure your thoughts, you create an action plan, and you communicate. So just like with critical thinking, the process ends with communication. Remember that if I can be a great thinker, I can be a very creative person, but if I keep the solutions in my head, if I'm not able to very simply convert my thinking, convert that into an action plan that can be understood by people who are going to implement it, then there's no point of creative thinking or critical thinking. So we should be able to communicate very effectively. We should be able to listen to people, and we should be able to communicate in a very, very simple, clear, and effective manner. Now, some of the tools that I have used for creativity, and I'm more than happy to share these. I can share the slides with you all if you feel that there's a need for it. Some of the tools that I personally like, I'm a very pen and paper based person, much older than you all, so maybe that's why. Um, Mind mapping, right? I start with the concept and then I start connecting the dots. And you can use mind maps for very simply just planning a birthday party. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to do that. If you have, if you haven't done mind mapping, it's really simple but very effective. All you need to do is, put one circle, birthday party for XYZ. How many people, things that you need for a birthday party. How many people can we have? What are the COVID restrictions? Are we going to have virtual party? Are we going to invite people? Will it be a blended party? Are we going to buy gifts? Are we, are we going to get the cake? Are we going to bake your cake? So all of these ideas, you start mind mapping. The second technique that I really use is the concept is, just observing people and observing people's behavior. And you get a lot of ideas from that. So the idea is that you have something, you can call it an idea wallet. Just watch people and talk to people, and you'll get fantastic ideas. What are they doing? Why is it that they're doing this? What is the time, when do you see that most, for example, at IIM Udaipur, you will see that most of the students are, they come to the canteen at 10:30 a.m. Why is that? Because the class got over. What are they eating? So, for example, I've made that observation. If you see most, if you see more number of students in the canteen area, then you can infer that probably mess food is not really good that particular day, or that particular meal is not very good. So you start, you observe and you start making those inferences. Very simple, work with your friends. If you're working with your friends, just give them nicknames. Give them funny nicknames. I do that in my class. Whenever we have any surprise quizzes, we encourage people to come up with nicknames. That fuels your creativity, right? That why do I want to call myself Wonder Woman? Why do I want to do that? What is it? What are the similarities between me and Wonder Woman? So that helps you to become more creative. And finally, I used to do this a lot when I was a kid. Unfortunately, not so much anymore. Adding new rules to the games that we play. So we used to play hide and seek. And in hide and seek, instead of counting from 1 to 100, we would say no, 100 to 1 count kar. Right? Count it backwards. So that's more challenging. Uh, when we are playing, we used to also play stupid those games where you had things written down in chits. So again, we would add more rules to that game. Another game that I used to play a lot as a kid was name, place, animal, thing. Uh, we used to then start adding things to it. That name, place, animal, thing, sports. Then place divided into continents, divided into countries. So just making it more and more challenging for each other. So very simple, but it keeps that. Remember, I said it's a muscle. Creativity and critical thinking are muscles, so you need to constantly exercise them. In order to be creative, it's very important that we become divergent thinkers. And I wanted to share this exercise with you, and you can all probably Google it. A paper clip, right? Unfortunately, I don't have a paper clip here. But if you take a paper clip and think about how many uses can that object have, or even anything, you don't have to think of a paper clip. If you just take a pen or a paper or a pencil, it has one function, which is it helps us to write. But can we use it for other things? Can I use it as a screwdriver? Can I use it as a stick? Can I use it as a dart? So the moment I'm thinking about, the different uses of a particular object, I'm automatically becoming a divergent thinker. That what else can we use? And to be very honest, if you look at Uber and Airbnb, those companies exist because their founders were divergent thinkers. People are buying things online. Maybe they will travel online as well, right? Maybe if I create an app where you can share cars. So these companies exist because they had founders who were divergent thinkers. So when you look at a pencil, of course we can write with it, but what else can we do? It's the same story with Netflix as well. They were looking at the Amazon model and they were like, what else can we do? Right? Amazon is selling objects. What else can we do? And they decided, well, content. We can also sell content online. We can also create, and that's how the streaming giant emerged. So thinking divergently is going to help a lot. I also want to bring your attention. I said already that questioning is very important. So Japanese have this technique. They call it the 5 whys technique. That whenever you get a piece of information or whenever you're talking to someone, ask why 5 times. And that is how you get to the root of the problem, right? So if somebody, if for example in class, right, I don't know if Neha has that experience, but sometimes, or maybe more times than I would like to say, we get students who are not interested in class. So you ask them, why is it that you are not interested in class? Why are you sleeping in class? Ma'am, I did not get a good night's sleep. Why did you not get a good night's sleep? And there was an event and I had to help with that event. Why did you have to work on the event the day before your class? Well, ma'am, I did not plan well. Why did you not plan well? Because I'm not interested in this particular topic. So when you keep asking those 5 whys, you are start understanding, you are opening the layers of that onion, you are peeling the onion, and you start understanding what the root cause of the problem is. And you will find that the root cause of the problem can be different for different people. Different students in my class have different reasons for not paying attention in class. And finally, something that I would like to share with you, and probably I'll conclude with that: teamwork. And we actually can leverage working in groups to enhance individual creativity and also to enhance group creativity. So when I'm teaching, I emphasize working in groups a lot. Most of the assignments that I give my students are group-based assignments. Even when they are in my class, and if I give them small activities, I always make it group activities because we learn from each other. And one of the things that you can do to encourage, to work when you're working in groups and when you're trying to enhance creativity is brainstorming, right? Get an idea and let's talk about this. Anything that comes into your mind. And then, you start connecting those ideas. So again, creativity and critical thinking are connected to each other. It could be anything, right? It could be random words. So sometimes in my class, when students are not sure about brainstorming exercises, I just give them a random word, right? So maybe you have an HR problem. Uh, let's say that you're trying to recruit, you're trying to recruit a marketing manager, and you're not sure whether you should recruit from outside, external recruitment, or whether you should promote somebody from within the organization. So that's the problem you're facing. And then I tell my students, go brainstorm on that. And I just give them a random word like cheese, that you have to brainstorm around this word. Now, most of them look at me completely flabbergasted. What the hell does cheese have to do with recruitment? What does cheese have to do with organization? But then I push them. I said, Achal, think about what are the properties of cheese. It could be soft, it could be yellow, it could be tasty. You keep it inside the fridge. Why do we keep it inside the fridge? Because it maintains its consistency. So if we are recruiting somebody from within the organization, they're going to be more consistent. They understand the culture, they understand the values, they understand the way of doing things in an organization. So that's how we connect something as random as cheese to the problem that we have at hand. So this is exercising the creative muscle. And to conclude, creativity is fueled by curiosity. It is fueled by asking questions. And I know that you've probably heard this from many people, but I am going to reiterate this. Please ask questions. Please don't take anything, any fact or any scenario that is presented to you for granted. Try to find what is happening behind the scenes. The why and hows are very important. And also experimentation. So critical thinking, creativity, if we just keep it in our hands, if we're only engaging in the intellectual aspect of it, then it's of no use. So experiment. Whenever you come up with some ideas, try them out on a small scale. Think about Kodak. Maybe a lot of you have not heard about Kodak, probably because you were too little when Kodak was around. So Kodak was one of the biggest companies, a market leader in photography. So they used to produce those camera films, and that was, in fact, we didn't, if you took a photo, you said it was a Kodak moment. So huge market leader. And now they don't exist. Because they kept on doing the thinking, but they never tried, they never experimented with the digital technologies. And so now they don't exist. The same example applies to Nokia as well. So that intellectual exercise of thinking creatively and thinking critically, it also has to be connected with action. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Don't wait for the apple to fall on your head. Be more proactive. Whenever you have creative ideas, whenever you're questioning things, whenever you have new recommendations, when you start working, try and implement those recommendations. Not on a massive scale, but on a small scale, right? Implement them with your team and then see what's happening. So it's always going to be a small wins exercise. And with that, again, each one of us is creative. Each one of us is a critical thinker. It's just that we haven't paid attention to it and we haven't worked on that skill. but we have the potential. So hopefully today I've shared some practices with you, and I really hope that with those practices you're able to exercise and develop as critical and creative thinkers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirti. Thank you. It was really, I mean, I would say you justified the objective of this session. It was very much insights which I got personally from the session. Of course, students would have got it. Now I have two questions
Sure.
from the students. One is a very basic questions, and I think it would be in the minds of many of the students that if I am not good in math, does it mean I'm not a good critical thinker?
Not at all. I would also encourage you to, when we say we are not good at maths, what does that mean? Is it something that you are basing on because you didn't score good marks? If that is what you're basing this assertion on, then I don't think it's true. Data analysis, critical thinking doesn't mean that I have to be very good at maths and that I need to remember the Pythagoras theorem and I need to be an expert in trigonometry and differentiation integration. I am also not. It's about collecting different kinds of information, and statistical analysis is only one way to look at information.
True.
And luckily, we have too many tools these days. If you brush up on your basics, there are tools that will help you.
True. Another question is, what is the role of imagination when we talk about critical and creative thinking?
So this is where, I mean, a lot of people say thinking outside of the box, and imagination can be sort of a similar word there. It is very important, this exercise. So I do this exercise every time I have a class or every time I have to speak in front of people to overcome my fear of public speaking. I imagine how it's going to go, and it helps me. Imagining how the ideal world looks like, right? If we implement this solution, this is what it's going to look like. So imagination is definitely part of that process when we are saying that you need to think outside the box. But make sure that imagination doesn't turn into daydreaming. Otherwise, that's not very effective.
Agree. So towards the end of the session, let me take this golden opportunity on behalf of IITM to propose a word of thanks to Dr. Kiriti Mishra. Thank you so much for honoring the session with your inspirational thoughts and kind words of wisdom. You truly said that yes, we all have the muscle and we need to work upon them. And I also truly feel that we all have unlimited potential, and it all depends on us how much we realize to it and how much we use it. And even very well highlighted by you is how important it is to ask questions. It is very important thinking outside the box and being curious and putting up questions to people around, information around, to make it more relevant and more helpful to us. And yes, before all of these things, we need to be a good communicator and an effective listener for that. So thank you so much. Once again, I would really express my sincere gratitude for such valuable and insightful thoughts that you shared with us. Further, I would like to extend my heartiest thanks to our beloved director, ma'am, Professor Dr. Prerna Mahajan, for consistent support in making every event a grand success for us. I would further take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to Mr. Gautam Kumar, Assistant Professor IITM, for putting his efforts and enthusiasm in making this event again a grand success. And last but not the least, I would extend my gratitude to the technical team of Mr. Mandal and Mr. Rajpal for the smooth flow of the event. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Kirti. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And all the best to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.